admit to the British people that this deal takes this country back under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, which is now able once again to overrule our courts, surrendering our judicial sovereignty.
Through the House on that basis.
Sir Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just point out to the Prime Minister that nothing can undo the fact that 17.5 million people voted leave, and they voted to take back control of our laws and to stop paying money to the EU. And that was a considerably larger vote than the 9.7 million who voted Labour at the last election. And now he is submitting to EU regulations without any control, and he is giving money, starting to pay money back to the European Union. He's giving up control over our laws and restoring payments to the European Union. He will pay a bitter political price for this betrayal.
My fishermen are furious that the Prime Minister has surrendered the fishing industry, and my constituents are furious that you've surrendered on freedom of movement and on rule-taking under the ECJ. But there is good news, Mr. Prime Minister. Do you accept that you've also surrendered the jobs of many of your backbench MPs in the next general election to reform?
Tensions exploded in the House of Commons as members of Parliament unleashed a relentless wave of criticism at Prime Minister Starmer, accusing him of quietly engineering a far-reaching reversal of Brexit promises. The accusations were sharp and direct after finally breaking free from the European Union. Britain was now being pulled back toward regulatory alignment, budget contributions, and judicial ties under Starmer's leadership. British politics, like this one. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Dark British. Believe it or not, over 98% of viewers watch our content without hitting the follow button. Subscribing is completely free.
He knows full well that we had a red line about not rejoining the EU, no single market, no customs union, no freedom of movement. We were told it was impossible to negotiate a better deal with the EU with those red lines. We've just done it. We've also showed that we are outside the EU because he will appreciate that having a deal with India and the US is inconsistent with membership of the EU. Could be no better evidence that we're not going back into the EU, nor are these negotiations on that basis. I know he understands that very, very well. I'm surprised at the way he puts his question. As for control of the borders, honestly, it went from quadrupling net migration after Brexit to nearly 1 million. That wasn't controlling our borders. It's a complete lack of control on the other side. Mr. Speaker, on the question of payments, I do think it's important to appreciate that we've achieved unprecedented access to EU markets without the budgetary payments of member states. That is an incredible achievement. The only payment of the SPS agreement are administrative costs to support the relevant costs of implementing and administering the scheme. For schemes and payments where it's in our national interest, we will negotiate proportionate contributions, as already happens under the deal negotiated by them, for example, in relation to R&D and into Horizon.
The opening strike came with a sharp reminder: 17.4 million people voted to leave the EU. That decision, many MPs stressed, wasn't just about trade. It was a demand for sovereignty. Sovereignty over borders, sovereignty over money, and most importantly, sovereignty over British laws. Yet critics argue that under Starmer's leadership, those promises are being erased. EU regulations are slipping back in, financial contributions to European programs are returning, and the one thing Leave voters wanted most, control, more out of reach than ever. What cuts even deeper for some MPs is the way this reversal is being framed as a diplomatic success. Starmer's government has celebrated renewed access to EU markets as a breakthrough, but according to his opponents, that access comes with a heavy price: a surrender of control dressed up as cooperation.
For a youth mobility scheme to help get their youth unemployment figures down. So can the Prime Minister tell the House what impact assessment he has done on his youth scheme for youth unemployment for young Brits, particularly white working class boys who suffer the most? And can he tell the House today the cap he has put on numbers for people coming into the UK? If he can't, this is a bitter betrayal of British youth.
The issue of immigration reignited fierce frustration in the Commons. MPs pointed to post-Brexit migration figures that defied expectations. Net migration hadn't just failed to drop, it had surged to nearly 1 million in recent years. For those who backed Brexit on the promise of stronger border control, this felt like outright betrayal. But it wasn't only about the numbers. The Prime Minister's recent proposal for a youth mobility scheme with the European Union raised alarms across party lines. Critics argued it looked less like a benefit for Britain's workforce and more like an economic lifeline for Europe's struggling youth. Countries such as France and Spain, where youth unemployment remains stubbornly high, would likely gain the most. The unspoken concern was the effect on young people in Britain, especially white working-class boys, a group long underrepresented. In higher education and skilled jobs, MPs pressed for answers. Where was the impact assessment? Where was the cap on incoming migrants? Where were the guarantees that this wouldn't quietly evolve into a backdoor return of free movement?
Young people in the United Kingdom the opportunity to work, to study and to travel in Europe. It is going to be a capped scheme of limited duration and with visas, something again everybody said we couldn't negotiate. We have negotiated. And in relation to our question about what we're doing for young people in this country, she should look to the trailblazer schemes that we set up that are helping young people back into work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The most pernicious part of this deal is dynamic alignment, by which we become an automatic rule taker from the European Union. Labour have been briefing journalists. We have an opt-out from that. I've read the document in detail. We don't. And besides, the ECJ is the ultimate arbiter in a dispute. It is, so the EU will always win. Why, Prime Minister, when the British people voted peacefully and democratically to leave the European Union, have you surrendered that right and made us a rule taker to the EU once again?
Starmer's government insists the scheme is capped, temporary, and strictly tied to visas, something they argue was once thought impossible to negotiate. But opposition MPs weren't buying it. At the core of the Commons clash lay a deeper concern: Britain's legal independence. For many MPs, the Brexit mandate was never just about trade or migration. It was about breaking free from the European Union's control over British law. Yet critics warned that the latest deal threatens to undo that very victory. They pointed to a clause known as dynamic alignment, a mechanism requiring the UK to remain in step with changing EU regulations in certain sectors. To opponents, this would reduce Britain to a passive rule taker, forced to follow decisions made in Brussels without having any say at the table.
Just on the question of how the rules are made, they will go through a parliamentary process in this House. In this House. We are already aligned. We are in alignment. We are just not getting the benefit of it. This gives us the benefit which will be counted in the business jobs and bills that we can deal with this. And in relation to an independent arbiter, there's independent arbitration where there's disputes in this agreement. Look, they all know this. Every trade deal has an arbitration clause to deal with the settlement of disputes. All trade deals have that, including all the trade deals that they have negotiated. On the question of the ECJ, if there's an issue of European law that needs to be referred by the independent arbitrators to the court, they then give a ruling on the interpretation. It passes back to the arbitrators to make the final decision. That is how trade deals work. But I do understand their new policy. Their new policy is against any trade deals. That's never been the Conservative Party policy before, but it's good that we've got clarity now.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Boston...
Then came the explosive issue of the European Court of Justice. While the government insisted that arbitration under the New Deal is independent, MPs pointed to the ECJ's lingering role in interpreting disputes involving EU law. To them, this meant British courts could once again be overruled by a foreign judiciary. The government pushed back, framing it as standard international practice. Arbitration panels, they argued, exist in every major trade deal worldwide, and in those rare cases where EU law must be interpreted, the ECJ only provides a legal opinion, one that arbitrators then use before making the final decision. But for many on the backbenches, that explanation simply didn't hold. Among the most passionate voices were MPs representing Britain's coastal constituencies, areas that voted overwhelmingly for Brexit, clinging to the promise of a fishing revival. For these communities, the EU had long symbolized decline and foreign control over British waters. Brexit, they believed, would reclaim that lost legacy. Yet MPs from regions like Boston and Skegness argued that the reality has been very different. Local fishermen who once felt hopeful now feel discarded. The new agreements, they claimed, still prioritize EU access over UK sovereignty, offering little real protection to the livelihoods of those who depend on the sea. For them, this wasn't just about quotas, it was about betrayal.
Skegness. My fishermen are furious that the Prime Minister has surrendered the fishing industry, and my constituents are furious that you've surrendered on freedom of movement and on rule-taking under the ECJ. But there is good news, Mr Prime Minister. Do you accept that you've also surrendered the jobs of many of your backbench MPs at the next general election to reform?
Well, I'll happily explain to his constituents the huge benefits of these deals measured in jobs that will be saved, jobs that can now thrive, bills that will come down. And it is really important for our economy that we have these deals. That is in the interest of his constituents. It's in the interest of the whole country.
Regular point.
Thank you.
Beyond fishing, the deeper worry is what these decisions mean for the future of British industry and identity. Constituents are watching as freedom of movement returns in new forms, as rule-taking under the ECJ creeps back in, and as their communities are left with more questions than answers on a sharp political warning. MPs made it clear this sense of betrayal won't just cost jobs in fishing towns, it could cost the Prime Minister his majority. Reform UK, the rising right-wing challenger, is gaining ground fast. If nothing changes, Starmer's own backbenchers may soon find themselves out of office. The closing salvos in the Commons weren't just about ideology, they were about economics. Even MPs who supported some EU cooperation demanded clarity. If the UK is already aligned with European food and safety standards, why accept a deal that lets the EU dictate future changes? This, they argued, was the moment Britain should have pushed for mutual recognition, an arrangement where two trading partners respect each other's standards without constant alignment. Other countries had secured such deals, so why not Britain? And this concern wasn't theoretical. If the EU tightens its standards tomorrow, UK businesses would face a harsh choice: comply or risk losing access to the European market. But under dynamic alignment, that compliance could come without Britain having any real say in the rules shaping its future.
British people that this deal takes this country back under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, which is now able once again to overrule our courts, surrendering our judicial sovereignty.
No, I mean, that's just wrong under the agreement. There's an independent arbitration. It's the same. It's the same as the Windsor framework, which you negotiated. It is an important point. It's an independent arbitration process. There's the same process for pretty well every trade deal that's struck, not just by us and other countries, but most other countries. In this particular case, if the independent arbitration needs reference on a point of law, it's referred to the ECJ, which then refers it back to the independent arbitrator to make a decision. So that's how it operates.
Josh Dean.
Speaker.
If the Prime Minister is right that our food standards are already in a...
Critics argued this wasn't just a missed opportunity. It was proof that Britain had gone back to the negotiating table with its hands half-tied and its leverage wasted. In response, the Prime Minister's allies highlighted the broader benefits: market access, lower bills, and more stability for businesses. But to those on the opposition benches, it all sounded too familiar. To them, the entire arrangement looked like a quiet return to EU membership in everything but name. For many who backed Brexit, this wasn't cooperation, it was capitulation. The debate over Brexit is far from over. For many MPs and voters, these new deals don't feel like progress, they feel like a slow slide back under Brussels' influence. From migration to legal rulings to trade rules, the promises made in 2016 now look fragile, if not broken. And with political pressure mounting and Reform UK gaining momentum, the question looms large: has Britain truly taken back control, handed it away again? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you want more updates like this, hit like and subscribe.